In the world of entrepreneurship, there are two ways of thinking. There is effectual thinking and there is causal thinking. The difference is how they look at the future. One looks at the future as though it already exists and therefore believes that their duty is to manage that future. The other believes that the future does not exist and that their duty is to create it. The latter produce entrepreneurs, the former produce managers. But what's the golden thread that joins both of them, whether it's an effectual thinker or a causal thinker, is the capacity to adapt. Certainly, entrepreneurs have a better ability to adapt because they interpret opportunity through totally different lenses as opposed to managers who believe that opportunities already exist. What's true with business needs to be true for the next generation of individuals, because in any case, what's the biggest business that exists than the business of running life itself? And similarly, we need to begin putting within the mindset of the next generation the tools that will help them be able to adapt effectively. Anything less than this will be able to see them stuck or lost in their transition. Life does not wait for anyone. Transitions are always happening. And you can choose to transition in panic or you can transition on purpose. If the next generation will be an authentic generation, they will need to begin adapting the mindsets that will make them transition on purpose as opposed to transitioning in panic. Resilience, an English word that means different things to different people. So we will not battle with the meaning, we will battle with how it is acquired. Resilience is the ability that is acquired when you get the right amount of challenge with the right amount of support. If you go to a gym and all you lift is a perfume can, and at the same time as you lift that perfume can, you're being assisted by your gym instructor, you're not building muscular resilience, you're actually building a mindset that makes you do what we call learned helplessness, because the challenge is too small, the help is too much. The other extreme is if you're in the same gym and you're meant to pick up a weight almost the weight of a hippo, and you do not have any assistance whatsoever. It's a task that I don't think any of us could be able to undertake, and it'll create a sense of overwhelm. In still the same sense, you will fail to build resilience, but in this case, it is because you have too big a challenge and too small assistance. Both extremes fail to build that critical muscle called resilience. What's true with gyms is true with life. Adapting is one of the things that is going to be required if we are going to build a next generation that is authentic. But for that adapting to happen, it needs to happen hand in hand with resilience, balancing the support with the challenge. And this is a topic we cannot avoid if we are going to raise an authentic generation. My name is ACACIA Jackson. This is season 2 of Authentic Conversations about Chats You and I Avoid, or what we call ACACIA. And we are focusing on raising an authentic generation. Today, we are looking at the question of adapting. Welcome. As we consider our passage in Scripture that has guided our conversations thus far, which is the account put together by Dr. Luke, a doctor in the early centuries who collected from sources about the experience of Jesus. He writes that famous story in his letter, his collection called by his name, the book of Luke, or the Gospel of Luke, chapter 15. We're reading from verse 11. This is what it says.
Jesus continued, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, 'Father, give me my share of the estate.' So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, The younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' So they began to celebrate.
You notice the prodigal son had to go through several phases of adapting. All except one were cases where his transitions or his efforts to adapt were done completely out of panic and not out of purpose. The only case where he adapts on purpose is when he is making the movement from the pigsty heading back home. He has a clear aim, he has a clear plan, he's going to a place that is best suited for his success. Otherwise, all the rest, receiving money and bolting out of home, reaching a faraway country and joining himself to strangers who waste his substance, moving from there and joining himself to somebody who owns pigs, all of those were transitions, yes. All of those were adaptations, but none of those was done out of a clear sense of purpose or with a clear goal in mind or a clear strategy in mind. None of those were transitions that were done on purpose. All of those were transitions done in panic. A clearer dissection of them will be able to help us draw parallels. We who are discussing this thing with and as the next generation, to be able to see how then can we be able to navigate our transitions. You see, adapting is going to be one of the key things, since every indication is that the next generation are going to live through a time where there is not only change, which is constant, a factor regardless of whichever generation, but what's unique about their change is that it is going to happen faster. It is going to happen more universally at a rate that is unprecedented. What technology has been able to inject to otherwise normal change processes is a none-before-seen rate of acceleration. What's true with changes that happen now is it creates windows of change open way faster, but they close equally faster. And no sooner does something open, it also is closing, and we're already moving to the next thing. For the longest time, music, for instance, had been stored in very big LP albums, which stayed with us for quite a while. And then we made the move from the big LP albums into cassette tapes. And cassette tapes stayed along for quite a number of decades. And you can quickly see how we just moved from cassette tapes, and then we moved to CDs, and from CDs to DVDs, and then the movement from DVDs to flash drives was even quicker. And then now we have gone to a world where we no longer have flash drives because everything is in the cloud. The movements, as you see, even in something as close as music, tells you the changes happen now way quicker, opportunities open way faster, but they close even faster. And one of the key skills that will be needed to be done if people are going to transition on purpose and not in panic is they need to become masterful at anticipating and navigating the changes. They will need to become maestros at adapting. Let's re-examine the adaptations of this story of the prodigal son, and let's see the flaws. Why did he, what four elements specifically resulted in him transitioning in panic? The thinking here being, if we understand what's at stake here, we can be able to see how to flip that so that the next generation, learning from the experience of the prodigal, can begin crafting purposeful transitions that take them to a place of success and significance on purpose and not just ending somewhere haphazardly. Number one, the prodigal son always seemed to have this, always except once, seemed to have this uncanny ability to misjudge where he was presently. Take for instance, when he is at home with the father, the servants, the brother, he does not seem to understand the position of privilege and the position of power that he has. He has a certain restlessness to himself. He imagines things can be better. He also heavily underestimates, or should I say overestimates, his ability to make good decisions, his ability to adjust to the world out there. And he severely underestimates the challenges that are there. In other words, let me put a letter P to it. He is completely oblivious about where he is at any time in the present. Way before he makes any single move, he is already doomed to make it in panic because his sense of interpreting who he is, where he is, what he's really good at, what he's not good at, what he has, what he doesn't have, all those things that constitute people's understanding of the component called present are extremely, extremely wanting. You see, before some of us got saved, when we were still younger, we would enter into those playground fights. And one of the rules in the playground fight is you picked a fight with somebody you felt you had a fair chance of at least prevailing or at worst going at a draw. You did not clearly pick on the boy who had bigger muscles, was taller than you, was rougher than you, because you knew you'd get a serious hiding from there. Even somehow, in our own pre-converted state, we knew something about knowing where we were presently. This man in the story seems to be lacking in that domain. And so will it be with any person of the next generation trying to adapt. If they over-amplify their strengths or understate their weaknesses, they will walk through a state of a misjudged ego, and when they step into the reality of the world, they will be completely misguided. One thing that is of concern here, if we are going to raise another authentic generation for the next generation, is we will need to begin learning the art of speaking truth to power. This especially goes to parents, to guardians, and to teachers. We've shifted from the previous generation whose primary way of motivation was speaking things in the negative and pointing things that were in the negative, which was not a good way. But we have swung to the other side where we try and show or create positives in everything, even at a time when the next generation is deserving of reproof, of rebuke, or of reprimand. At times when they need to be given a genuine assessment of their strengths and of their weaknesses, we now have sports days where everybody is a winner. We now have examinations where everyone passes. We now have places where everybody's taste is okay. And somewhere viscerally, we know this is not true about life. We know people with singing ability lay in a range. Not everybody has the same singing ability. We know people with athletic ability exist in a range. And the more we keep raising young people to feel good about themselves, but not to have the ability to speak the truth about variety to the power of their mental abilities, of their science ability, of the access they possess, the more we will be nurturing people who, like the prodigal son, are completely oblivious of where they exist presently. We will end up with a generation who will begin pursuing careers they have no business getting into in the first place. So the first domain where this young man fails in and results in him making the overwhelming majority of his transitions in panic and makes him poor at adapting, is understanding the domain of present. The second domain of adapting that he is weak at is a domain of attaching. You see, this is a reality. We are not islands. God allowed us to be able to exist in the plurality we are. I am good at X, you're good at Y, the other one is good at Z. God created human beings not to compete, but to collaborate. And in the process of adapting, one comes to face this reality very properly. And your success or failure in adapting process is going to be determined by A, your ability to recognize your need to plug into the resources and the wisdom and the support you need from others, and B, it will also depend on your ability to choose the right people, the right time and the right things and places to be able to attach to. Attach to the wrong thing, it might frustrate, if not altogether kill your adapting process. Attach at the wrong time, and you find that you are unable to actually even adapt altogether. And yet again, the prodigal son shows a funny inability to adapt because his ability to attach was extremely wanting. He detaches from home, the place he should have attached to a bit more longer. You see, if you have a father, like he did in this case, who's been able to build a sizable wealth, there's something about him that you may need to hang around and learn from him, especially when you're trying to adapt from being dependent to becoming independent. You need to learn the ropes. You need to attach from him to be mentored. But the very person this prodigal son needed to attach to is the very person in the first place he detaches to. And then look whom he attaches to. He goes, number one, and attaches to some nondescript individuals in a faraway country whose only contribution in his life is helping him waste his substance on riotous living. He therefore detaches from what he should have attached to and then attaches to people he should never have attached to. In the hour of crisis, he probably realizes his mistake, and then it finally also manifests his weakness in choosing timing and choosing places to attach. He goes and attaches to one person in that faraway country who sends him to the pigs. And so his previous exposure to business and farming that was done back home is nowhere close to being used, as now he has to sit there and watch the pigs and imagine himself competing with them for their food. So this weakness in him choosing the wrong timing to attach, the wrong people to attach to, the wrong things to detach from, is something that continuously plagues him until at the final moment when he comes to his senses and decides, I need to detach from the pigsty and go and reattach to home. That's the final time when he makes an attachment on purpose. It is because at that point he exercises the domain of attaching in the correct way. One thing that is common in the generation that is coming up is because of their averseness to authority, they end up attaching to people who are extremely like-minded. And also, because of the ubiquitousness of information due to the information age we are living within, they have the ability to attach to other ideas and philosophies outside there, some untested, some unproven. And many seem to operate under the mistaken idea that if it is online, then it can be relied. And they over-rely on their judgment and end up attaching on the wrong things. This whole domain of attaching speaks again to the urgent need for mentorship and coaching structures that will be able to come and support the next generation so that they will be able to know who to attach to, when to attach to, and also importantly, who to detach from and when to detach. So domain number one is being able to clearly and accurately understand where you are presently. Domain number two is the ability to know who, when, and how to attach or to detach. Then the third domain this young man is very poor at is a domain of repositioning himself. Almost very related to the whole idea of attaching, it is true that during the adapting process, where you begin is not necessarily where you need to end. And therefore, there comes the reality that you will need to keep repositioning yourself. But the success of repositioning is determined by two things. Number one, it is determined by the clarity of the intended destination, because proper repositioning is not done in a vacuum. It is done with a real idea of moving from one point and taking yourself closer to a desired end or a desired point. And this guy just seems to have one goal in mind, which is anywhere, just not home. So anywhere that's just not home would have worked for him. And as it is often said, if you leave home with no intended destination in mind, you cannot say you're lost. He is very weak at repositioning because number one, he does not have a clear, well-described, purposeful end game in mind. And then number two, his weakness in repositioning is true because he is not very good at doing the second thing, at knowing who and when to attach or detach from. So that thing keeps hindering his capability to reposition himself accordingly. Again, because of the bombardment the next generation is receiving in terms of ideas, in terms of information, in terms of philosophy, and often because of them having weaknesses with being very clear on what their purpose and their calling and their weakness and strengths are, many of them struggle with repositioning and end up lingering or will end up lingering on things which they shouldn't be, or they will just move because it is a current fad or it's a current fashion or it's a thing that makes them feel okay at this point with no clear ground being gained, with no clear goal being pushed or targeted. And as a result, when especially they reach the quarter life crisis of their 18 to around 30, 32 years, this failure to reposition will become a very nagging thing because it will be expressed with many of them feeling a sense of being stuck. And the frustration will be then exerted or removed on everything that is perceived to making them be feeling stuck. And religion is often one of the first targets because some people will then begin feeling it is their faith that is straitjacketing them or making them become stuck up. And they will therefore seek to cut loose from their faith and from other meaningful relationships that should have been enhanced. But because they have felt stuck due to a failure to know how to reposition, because they don't have a clear end in mind, they end up cutting loose of anything. And at times, the things they cut off loose are the very things they need. If the next generation is going to be a generation that is going to learn to adapt, and if the people supporting them are going to be people who are going to also learn to adapt to them, we will need to learn to reposition. We'll need to learn to reposition the message and the messaging to them. We will need to learn to be able to speak truth to power to them, to always know where they are presently, and truth to power to ourselves as communicators to them so that we can know where we are relative to them. We'll need to build better ways to attach to their reality, to attach to them, not because they need to be seen as weaklings to be served, but it's just the reality. They are going to be the majority. The world that is coming ahead is going to be a world that is going to be more favorable to them. And if we're going to set them up for success, we will need to do that. So we'll need to deal with the dimension of present. We'll need to deal with the dimension of attaching. We'll need to do with the dimension of repositioning. And then the fourth and the final thing that the prodigal son was very weak at and which jeopardized a lot of his adapting ending up with him making most of his adaptations and transitions in panic as opposed to on purpose. He was very poor at the domain of avoiding two important things. He was weak at avoiding distractions, and he was weak at avoiding destroyers. He was all through the story except the tail end, which thankfully he comes back to his senses and gets back. He was an extremely distracted individual. The Bible is a very clean, generally clean book. It uses very polished language. So you see, when it groups his behavior with just that phrase, riotous living, it probably encompasses unprintable things. Okay, and here's a man with wealth. Here's a man with quite an amount of wealth, it seems, according to the story. And when he goes out there, he is so heavily distracted that he is unable to hold on to that wealth and wastes it completely, to the point at the hour of a crisis, he has nothing to hold on. If he had the semblance of focus, he should have been able to at least have remained with something. Here's a man who is at home with all the advantages possible to him at that time to help him grow to the best. But he is so distracted that he does not recognize what they are. And he is so heavily distracted that no sooner does he receive his money than he is completely out of the place. And distraction, D-I-S-T, makes him fail to realize destroyers. He, because he's a very distracted individual, ends up uniting himself to destroyers in the far country. He ends up even uniting himself to a farmer who destroys his potential. I've said before in this episode today that this guy comes from a farming background. He probably knew a thing or two, way more than just sitting and watching pigs and craving for their food. But you see, he's united himself to one who would destroy his potential. Just the same way he'd united himself to a gang of people who destroyed his wealth. So if he and if the next generation are going to become maestros at adapting, they will need to become adept at understanding and recognizing things that distract and things that destroy. We have a limited amount of something called willpower and a limited amount of focus. And that is why Jesus was very keen to tell us what is in a man's heart manifests in its action. He says, from the abundance of the heart comes all the issues of life. And Jesus, recognizing this limitation we have in focus and in willpower, admonishes us in the account of his life as given to us by Matthew, the 6th chapter of that book, called by the same name of Matthew. Verse 33 says, "Then seek ye first the kingdom of God and its righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you." Jesus in the verses prior says, "Take no thought about what you shall eat, what you shall drink, with what you shall be clothed, because after these things do the publicans or do the pagans worry about." Jesus understands that what you focus on grows. And he understands that a distracted person is allowing that the things that distract him should be the things that grow to capture his mind. And very often those things will lead him to destroying. And so to raise the next generation, they will need to have their minds shifted from the things that distract, which are often very worldly things, and begin helping them to focus on things that would build them, which are domiciled within Scripture in its practical, clear, and relevant application. So those four things will need to be in place if we are going to have a next generation that is going to be maestros at adapting on purpose and not in panic, understanding of their present, attaching to the right things, repositioning and knowing when to, and then avoiding distractions and avoiding things that destroy us. This is an authentic chat about conversations you and I avoid. We're talking about raising an authentic generation. Let's stay with this conversation.